The torches along the Calvary trade road burned low as the last caravan of the season rolled toward the northern pass. Savannah had exactly 90 seconds before the guards circled back. She counted each heartbeat like a prayer, pressed flat against the rain-soaked wall of the merchant's quarter, watching the procession of black and gold carriages crawl through the eastern gate of Ashenmere. 12 carriages in total, each one flanked by mounted warriors whose armor gleamed like dark water under the flickering light. She knew whose carriages these were. Everyone in the 5 provinces knew. Cale Draven, Alpha King of the Ironhold Dominion. The wolf they called the Scourge of the Eastern Mountains, the man whose name mothers whispered to silence disobedient children, whose territories stretched from the frozen Calvary peaks to the black shores of the sunken coast. The most feared alpha in living memory, and Savannah was about to climb into one of his carriages. 3 days ago, this would have been unthinkable. 3 days ago, she had been the dutiful daughter of House Morin, preparing for a marriage that would secure her father's crumbling alliances and fill the family's empty vaults with dusk and gold. Lord Hector Duscan, 53 years old, 3 dead wives, a reputation that traveled ahead of him like the smell of something rotting. Savannah had met him once, at the betrothal feast her father organized without her knowledge. She had entered the dining hall expecting a routine gathering, and found instead a man with yellowed teeth and possessive hands who had looked at her the way a butcher examines a cut of meat. "She will do," Hector had said to her father. Not to her. Never to her. "The breeding hips are adequate. I expect the bonding ceremony within the fortnight." Her father had smiled, had poured more wine, had clapped Hector on the shoulder like an old friend closing a business deal. That night, Savannah found the contract on her father's desk. She was not being married, she was being sold. A clause near the bottom stipulated that should she fail to produce an heir within the first year, Lord Duscan reserved the right to take a second mate while retaining full claim over Savannah's body and her wolf. The plan had formed in desperation. Cale Draven's envoy was passing through Ashenmere tonight, the last travelers permitted through the northern pass before winter sealed the mountains. If she could reach one of the rear carriages, the supply wagons, she could hide among the cargo until the caravan crossed into Ironhold territory. No one from Ashenmere would follow her into the Ironhold Dominion. The Scourge's borders were inviolable. Of course, if she was discovered, Cale Draven would be well within his rights to execute her as a trespasser. But death at the hands of a feared alpha was still preferable to a lifetime beneath Hector Duscan. The guards completed their rotation. Savannah ran. Her bare feet slapped against wet cobblestones as she sprinted across the gap between the merchant wall and the slow-moving caravan. She had left her shoes behind deliberately. Bare feet were quieter. She had also left behind her cloak, her mother's ring, and every possession that might identify her as a daughter of House Marin. She carried nothing but the thin dress on her back and the terror in her chest. The 8th carriage was her target. Its rear latch was a simple hook mechanism, not the reinforced locks of the forward carriages. Savannah reached it in 6 seconds. Her fingers found the latch, slippery with rain. She fumbled once, twice. On the 3rd attempt, it gave way with a metallic click that sounded deafening in the silence. She hauled herself inside and pulled the door shut behind her. Darkness swallowed her whole. She crawled between 2 tall crates and wedged herself into the narrow gap, pulling a bolt of dark fabric over her body. The space smelled of cedar and iron and something deeper, something wild and ancient that made her wolf stir uneasily in her chest. The carriage lurched through the gate, and Savannah held her breath through the muffled exchange between the gate guards and the outriders. She heard the words, "Ironhold business," and "Alpha's orders," spoken with the kind of clipped authority that discouraged further questions. Then they were through. The road beyond the walls was rough, and the carriage jolted with each rut and stone. Savannah braced herself between the crates, trying to keep still, trying to slow her breathing, trying not to think about what would happen if she was discovered. She was so focused on being silent that she almost missed the sound. A footstep. Inside the carriage. Savannah's blood turned to ice. Another footstep. Closer. The creak of a boot on wood, deliberate and unhurried. And then a voice. Low, deep, calm in a way that was far more terrifying than any shout. I can hear your heartbeat. Savannah stopped breathing. The darkness inside the carriage was absolute, but she could feel a presence moving through it with the certainty of someone who did not need light to see. The footsteps came closer, measured, patient. A predator who knew exactly where its prey was hiding and felt no urgency to reach it. Your pulse is approximately 140 beats per minute, the voice continued, conversational, almost bored. Which tells me you are either gravely ill or gravely frightened. Given that you entered this carriage with considerable agility, I suspect the latter. Savannah pressed herself deeper between the crates. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The carriage was moving. The door was latched from outside. You may continue hiding if it brings you comfort. But we have a 12-hour journey ahead of us, and I would prefer to know whether I am sharing my carriage with a frightened girl or a competent assassin. The distinction matters to me. His carriage. The words registered like a physical blow. Not the eighth carriage, not a supply wagon. His carriage. She had climbed into the personal transport of Cale Draven, Alpha King of the Ironhold Dominion. Savannah's wolf, suppressed for 3 days through sheer force of will, surged against her ribs with sudden, overwhelming force, not in fear, in recognition. Something ancient and involuntary was responding to the presence above her, and the sensation was so powerful it nearly made her cry out. She bit her tongue until she tasted blood. I am going to light a lamp now. If you are an assassin, I suggest you make your attempt before I do. It will be your only opportunity. A match struck. A small flame caught. Warm amber light bloomed through the carriage, pushing back the darkness inch by inch. And Savannah saw the Alpha King of the Ironhold Dominion for the first time. The stories painted him as a monster, a scarred, brutish creature of pure violence and territorial rage. The man holding the lamp was tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that spoke of functional strength rather than display. His dark hair was cut short, almost military, and a thin scar traced the line of his left jaw from ear to chin. But his eyes. The color of storm clouds breaking over the sea, a pale gray blue that held an intelligence so sharp it felt like being examined under a blade. Those eyes found her immediately. At the thin dress soaked through with rain, at the bare feet, scraped and bleeding from the cobblestones, at the dark hair plastered to her face, and the eyes that stared back at him with a terror she could not disguise. Something shifted in his expression, something she could not name and did not expect. Not an assassin, then, he said quietly. Please. The word came out broken, barely a whisper. Please, I am not a spy. I am not a threat. I just needed to get out. Just please, do not send me back. Her voice cracked on the last word, and to her horror, tears began to slide down her cheeks. She had held everything together through the discovery, the planning, the terrifying sprint across the courtyard. But something about begging this stranger for the mercy everyone said he did not possess shattered the last of her composure. Then he did something that rearranged the entire architecture of Savannah's understanding. He removed his outer coat, a heavy black garment lined with silver fur, and held it out to her. You are shivering, he said simply. She took the coat with trembling hands. It was warm. It smelled of pine smoke and cold mountain air, and something underneath that made her wolf settle deeper in her chest with that same bewildering recognition. Cale sat on the crate opposite her, placing the lamp between them. There is no next stop. The caravan does not halt until the Ironhold border post, 11 hours from now. If I put you out on the Calvary Road in this weather, with no shoes and no provisions, you will be dead before morning. So you will stay. He said it as a statement. You will tell me who you are running from and why, and depending on what you tell me, I will decide what happens next. And if I refuse to tell you? The faintest shadow of something crossed his face. Not a smile, but the ghost of one, as if the concept of someone refusing him was novel enough to be interesting. Savannah pulled his coat tighter and met those pale eyes with what little courage she had left. My name is Savannah. I am a daughter of House Muren of the Ashenmere province. My father has sold me in a bonding contract to Lord Hector Duskin, and the ceremony is at dawn tomorrow. I would rather die in these mountains than go through with it. Hector Duskin, Cale repeated. The name left his mouth the way one might name a species of vermin. I know what he is. I know what happened to his 3 previous wives. I know why no healer in the 5 provinces will speak of the injuries they treated in that household. Then you understand why I ran. I understand why you should have run sooner. Cale leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, those pale eyes holding hers with an intensity that should have been frightening but somehow was not. Savannah of House Marin, no one is sending you back to Hector Duskin. Not tonight. Not ever. He paused. You are safe here. 3 words. Spoken without drama or ceremony. Spoken the way a man states a fact so obvious he is almost irritated at having to say it aloud. And Savannah, who had not felt safe in 21 years of life, broke down and wept. Cale did not try to comfort her. He did not touch her. He simply sat across from her in the swaying carriage and let her cry until she had nothing left. When she finally lifted her head, a tin cup of water and a strip of dried venison sat on the crate beside her. She had not seen him move. Eat. Your body is consuming itself. Slowly, or you will be sick. She ate, watching the Alpha King write in a leather-bound journal with a precise, unhurried hand. The contradiction was disorienting. This was the scourge of the eastern mountains, offering dried meat to a stowaway and making notes as if this were the most ordinary evening of his life. You said your father sold you, he said, without raising his eyes. The contract, was it a standard bonding agreement or a transfer of guardianship? I did not know there was a difference. A bonding agreement requires consent of both parties under the old laws. A transfer of guardianship reclassifies the bride as a dependent of the groom's household, removing her legal standing entirely. One can be challenged before a pack tribunal. The other cannot. He spoke about the law the way other men spoke about weather. I do not know, she admitted. I only saw parts of the contract. Then we will need to obtain a copy. Why would you help me? You do not know me. By your own laws, you could have me imprisoned. I find that the character of a society is best measured by how it treats those who have no power. If I treat you as a criminal for saving your own life, then I am no better than your father or Hector Duskin. Something darker moved behind his eyes. I have been called many things, Savannah. Monster, tyrant, scourge. I have earned some of those names. But I will not earn the name of a man who sends a barefoot girl back to a beast like Hector Duskin. The carriage hit a rut, and her sleeve rode up, exposing the bruise that wrapped around her left wrist like a dark bracelet. Cale's eyes dropped to it. That is a restraint bruise. When did Duskin visit your father's house? The betrothal feast. He grabbed my arm when I tried to leave the table. He said he wanted to inspect what he was buying. The sound from Cale's chest was not human. A subsonic growl that vibrated through the wooden frame and made the lamp flames shudder. Then it stopped. He drew a controlled breath. When we reach the border, you will be given quarters in the eastern wing of Dunhallow Keep. You will have food, clothing, and the protection of my household guard. No one will touch you. And what do you want in return? The question came out sharp with the survival instincts of a woman who had learned that nothing came without a price. I want nothing from you, Savannah. You are not a transaction. You are a person who needs help. That is the entirety of the arrangement. She searched his face for the lie. She found only those steady gray eyes looking back at her, with something she had never seen directed at her before. Respect. They rode in silence for hours. Savannah dozed fitfully, jerking awake with each lurch of the carriage, her body too wired with adrenaline to fully surrender to sleep. Each time she opened her eyes, Cale was in exactly the same position. Writing. Reading. Occasionally staring out the small window at the mountain darkness with an expression she could not decipher. She woke properly when the carriage slowed. "The border post," Kyle said, rising to his full height. "Stay here. Say nothing." He paused at the door. "When we are through, you are under my protection. That means Hector Duskin will have to come through me. No wolf alive has ever come through me. None ever will." Through the carriage walls, she heard Cale speaking to the border guards. Then a different voice, agitated. "My lord, there is a rider approaching from the south. Fast. He carries the banner of House Duskin." Savannah's heart stopped. They had discovered her absence. Hector Duskin's man was at the border. And the bonding ceremony was less than 6 hours away. Savannah pressed her ear against the carriage wall, straining to hear every word. "By order of Lord Hector Duskin, I demand inspection of this caravan. A bonded woman has been stolen from her intended mate." Stolen. Bonded. The ceremony had not even taken place, and already Hector was claiming ownership. Then Cale spoke. No urgency. No defensiveness. "On whose authority does a Duskin rider issue demands at an Ironhold border crossing? I carry a sealed warrant. The woman is legally bound under a transfer of guardianship. Her flight constitutes theft of Duskin property and... property." The single word fell like a blade on a block. "You are standing at my border, claiming that a living woman is property. And you are asking me to search my own caravan to retrieve that property on behalf of a man whose household has buried 3 wives in 11 years. Silence. "There is no stolen property in this caravan. There is a guest of the Ironhold Crown, traveling under my personal protection. If Lord Duskin wishes to dispute that status, he is welcome to present his case at Dunhallow Keep." A pause. Quieter. Colder. "He also knows what happened to the last man who rode uninvited into my territory making demands." 10 agonizing seconds, then hoofbeats, retreating south, growing fainter until the mountain wind swallowed them entirely. Cale climbed back inside, his expression neutral, as if he had just concluded a tedious customs inspection rather than a diplomatic confrontation that could ignite a territorial war. "Duskin knows you are with me. He will exhaust every political channel before he considers direct confrontation. That gives us time to ensure every avenue is closed to him." The carriage crossed into Ironhold territory, and Savannah felt the change through her wolf rather than her human senses. The land thrummed with the alpha's power, and her wolf, instead of bristling with territorial unease, settled, like coming home. She shoved the feeling down and buried it deep. They reached Dunhallow Keep at first light. It was a fortress carved from the dark granite of the Calvary Range itself, its towers rising from the rock face as if they had grown there rather than been built. No ornamental gardens, no decorative banners, just stone and iron and the quiet certainty of a place designed to withstand anything. A woman waited at the main steps, tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped auburn hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She wore leather armor like a second skin and carried a long sword strapped across her back. "Brennick," Cale said. "Status." "Quiet across all borders." Her sharp hazel eyes moved to Savannah, barefoot and wrapped in the king's coat. "You have brought company." Savannah of House Marin. Guest. Eastern Wing. Full household protection. No one enters her chambers without her explicit consent. Brennick's eyebrow rose 1 millimeter. Eastern Wing. Those are the consort's quarters. They are the most secure rooms in the keep. That is why I chose them. Something passed between them, a silent conversation conducted through eye contact and years of shared understanding. Brennick turned to Savannah with a nod that was neither warm nor cold, but precisely correct. "Welcome to Dunhallow, Lady Savannah." Lady Savannah. She had been called many things in her father's house: disappointment, burden, the one who was not a son, never lady. The Eastern Wing was a revelation, a room larger than her family's entire living quarters. A bed draped in dark fur and linen so fine it poured through her fingers like water. A stone hearth blazing with warmth, and windows that looked out over a valley so vast and green that Savannah forgot to breathe. An attendant named Idriel laid out fresh clothing, simple, practical, well-made. The king asked that these be provided. He said you arrived without belongings. Does he often take in strays? Idriel hesitated. In 4 years of service, my lady, you are the first guest to be housed in the Eastern Wing. She bathed, she dressed, she ate. She sat by the window and watched hawks circle above the valley. And for the first time in years, no one told her where to stand, what to say, or who to be. The freedom was so unfamiliar, it felt like vertigo. 3 weeks passed, and Savannah learned 2 things about the Ironhold Dominion. First, that it was nothing like the savage, lawless territory the southern provinces described. Kale's domain was rigidly ordered, efficiently governed, and populated by wolves who treated their alpha with genuine devotion rather than cowering obedience. Second, that Kale Draven was avoiding her. Not, obviously. He was occupied with border negotiations and the 100 small crises of governance. But Savannah noticed things. Fresh flowers appeared in her chamber every 3rd day, mountain wildflowers that required a 2-hour ride into the high meadows. Her meals included specific foods she had mentioned enjoying during their carriage ride, foods she had not mentioned to anyone else. And sometimes, late at night, she would hear footsteps in the corridor. Slow, deliberate, pausing at her door for several long seconds before continuing on. Her wolf always knew. And each night when those footsteps paused, her wolf would settle into a quiet, inexplicable peace that lasted until morning. Savannah made herself useful. She had been trained as a healer by her mother before the woman's death, one of the few skills her father had permitted because it increased her value as a bride. Dunhallow's healers welcomed her with growing enthusiasm as they discovered the depth of her knowledge. "Where did you study?" asked Haddon, the senior healer, as she corrected his preparation of a fever tonic he had been making wrong for 15 years. "My mother. She was common-born but gifted. She died when I was 12. My father believed a woman's education was a waste of resources better spent on dowry negotiations." Haddon made a sound of disgust that warmed Savannah's heart. She was in the healing ward on the 22nd day when the world she had left behind reached through the mountains and grabbed her by the throat. Brennick appeared in the doorway, her face carved from iron. "The king requests your presence in the council chamber, immediately." Kale stood at the head of the table, surrounded by grim-faced advisors. He placed a document before her, a formal petition from the Provincial Council of Ashenmere, co-signed by Hector Duskin and her father. "They are claiming I am mentally unfit," Savannah said, her hands steady. "Pre-bonding hysteria, 3 physicians I have never met." She found the second page. "And they are invoking the Treaty of Ashenmere, Article 9, the mutual return of displaced persons. They want to starve your people to get me back." One advisor, a gray-haired wolf named Korath, spoke. "The Ashenmere grain shipments supply 40% of our winter stores. If those are cut off—" "I am aware," Kale said. the growl beneath his words silencing the room. "I will go back," Savannah said. Every head turned. "If my presence threatens your people's survival, I will return voluntarily." Kale looked at her the way a man looks at a horizon. "What do you believe will happen to you if you return to Hector Duskin after publicly humiliating him?" She knew the answer. She might not survive a month. Kale turned to Korath. "Begin sourcing alternative grain from the coastal provinces, open negotiations with the Meridian Compact, and send a message to my sister in Varanthe. Tell her I will attend her spring gala after all. Tell her I am bringing a guest. The cost of rerouting our entire grain supply will be significant, and I will bear every coin of it before I hand a woman over to a man who will destroy her." Kale's gaze swept the room. "Are there further objections?" There were none. He looked at Savannah, and beneath his composure was something fierce and tender and entirely at odds with every story about the scourge. "You are not going back. And the next time you offer to sacrifice yourself for my convenience, remember that I have never once asked you to." He began issuing orders for the restructuring of the kingdom's supply chain, dismantling a century-old trade agreement with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything. For her. He was reshaping his kingdom for her. Savannah sat at the table long after the advisors filed out, and felt something crack open in her chest that she had kept sealed for 21 years. It terrified her more than Hector Duskin ever had. The flowers appeared again 2 days later. White mountain violets, so rare Savannah had only seen them in botanical illustrations. She carried the vessel to the council chamber where Kale was reviewing dispatches alone. "The mountain violets. They only grow above the tree line on Mount Selvan. A 4-hour ride each way, in terrain that would break a horse's legs if the rider was not careful." "I was not aware you were a botanist." "I was not aware you were a florist." That near invisible lift at the corner of his mouth, closer to the surface than it had ever been. "Brennick would tell you I ride to the high country for solitude." "And what would you tell me?" The hint of warmth faded. Something more honest replaced it. "That I cannot sleep. That I have not slept properly since a woman climbed into my carriage and looked at me like I was the last thing standing between her and the end of the world. And that riding to the high country at 4 in the morning is preferable to standing outside your door like a fool, which is what I do on the nights I cannot ride. I know about the footsteps. I hear you every night. I told myself you were asleep. I was not. I know. I could hear your heartbeat change when I stopped at the door." He opened his eyes, and the vulnerability was so profound it stole her breath. "As if you were waiting for me." Savannah's wolf flared inside her chest so hard she gasped. Not in fear, not in recognition, in need. A need so vast and ancient it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her own body. "What is happening to me, Kale? My wolf responds to you. She settles when you are near and aches when you are not. That is not what happens when a wolf enters a foreign alpha's domain. No, it is what happens when a wolf recognizes its mate." The word detonated in the silence. "That is impossible. The mate bond is supposed to be immediate. If we were fated, we would have known the moment we—" She stopped. The memory crashed over her. The carriage. The darkness. His eyes for the first time. Her wolf surging with sudden force. The recognition she had crushed under the weight of her terror and refused to examine. "I have known since the moment I scented you hiding between those crates," Kale said, his knuckles white with restraint. "My wolf knew what you were to me, and it took every ounce of control I possessed not to reach for you. Why did you not tell me? Because you were terrified. Because the last thing you needed was another alpha claiming rights over you in the dark. I would rather cut out my own tongue than make you feel like you were being traded from one cage to another." The words hit Savannah with a force that rearranged something fundamental inside her. Every alpha she had ever known treated the mate bond as a right, an entitlement. something to be claimed and enforced. Her father had spoken of bonds the way he spoke of contracts, obligations to be honored and debts to be paid. And here was the most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms, telling her he had choked down the most primal instinct a wolf could feel, because her fear mattered more than his need. She stood and walked to him. She placed her hand over his. The contact was electric. She felt his wolf slam against his control, felt the answering surge of her own, felt the bond between them flare like a lit fuse. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "Tell me you do not want this, and I will walk away. I will protect you forever and never speak of the bond again. I do not want you to stop. I am tired of being afraid of the only thing in my life that has ever felt right." Kyle kissed her with the accumulated force of 3 weeks of denial, his hands cradling her face as if she were made of something infinitely fragile and infinitely valuable. Her wolf howled with fierce, triumphant joy. The bond ignited, a golden thread winding through her body. She could feel him, the loneliness that had calcified around his heart over years of ruling alone, the desperate, disbelieving gratitude that she was here, that she was real, that she wanted him. Then the chamber door burst open. Brennick stood in the doorway, face drained of color. A blood-spattered messenger slumped against the wall behind her. "Hector Duskin has crossed the Ashenmere border. 300 wolves. Siege weapons in the column. He means to take Dunhallow." The warmth of the bond was still singing through Savannah's veins when the cold reality crashed over her. He was bringing a war. Dunhallow Keep had not been besieged in 17 years. The last force to attempt it had been a coalition of 3 rival packs who believed that numbers alone could crack the fortress carved from the mountain itself. Their siege lasted 9 days. On the 10th morning, 14-year-old Cale Draven had led a counterattack through a network of tunnels expanded and reinforced by generations of Draven alphas. The coalition's alphas were dead before noon. Now he stood on the eastern battlements, watching 300 Duskin wolves spread across the valley floor like a dark stain. Savannah stood beside him, despite Brennick's repeated and increasingly creative attempts to confine her to the eastern wing. "You should not be up here," Cale said, though his hand found the small of her back, and did not move away. The bond between them hummed with a low, constant warmth that made separation feel physically wrong. "You should stop telling me where I should and should not be." That quiet warmth flickered across his features, more visible now than it had ever been. "I am beginning to understand that telling you anything is a largely ceremonial exercise," Brennick reported. 300 wolves plus approximately 40 human mercenaries with crossbows and siege equipment. The mercenaries are the concern. Our wolves can hold the walls against any shifted assault, but bolts and battering rams do not care about fangs. Mixed banners in the column. House Grathane, House Pollock, and at least 2 mercenary packs from the Free Territories. "An alliance," Savannah said quietly. "He has built an alliance." "Not Duskin," Cale said. "He lacks the political sophistication. Someone is behind this." A parley horn sounded. A single rider left a sealed scroll on a flat stone and retreated. The seal bore the crest of the provincial council, and beneath it, pressed into the dark wax, a second mark that made Cale go dangerously still. "The Archon's mark!" Every wolf within earshot reacted. Brennick's hand moved to her sword. "The Archon is the shadow authority behind the provincial council," Kyle explained to Savannah. "Someone has been consolidating power for years, manipulating trade agreements, arranging marriages, positioning allies. Your marriage to Duskin was orchestrated. His territory borders mine to the south. With control of your wolf and House Marin's lands to the west, a single faction would control every territory adjacent to the Ironhold Dominion." The implications crashed over her like cold water. "They were not buying a bride," she whispered. "They were positioning a siege. And when you fled, you disrupted a plan years in the making. The Archon is not besieging Dunhallow for Duskin's wounded pride. This is about removing me and absorbing the Ironhold into a unified provincial authority. How many wolves do we have? Cale asked Brennick. 112 combat ready. Send riders through the northern tunnels. Every allied pack within 3 days' ride. Call them all in. That night, the first assault came. 50 wolves hit the eastern wall under cover of darkness, while crossbow bolts rained from the tree line to pin down the defenders. Savannah worked in the healing ward as the wounded were brought in. 3 wolves with bolt injuries. One with a crushed shoulder from a falling stone. She set bones and stitched wounds and brewed pain tonics with hands that did not shake, and she tried not to listen for Cale's voice among the sounds of battle beyond the walls. The attack was repelled within 2 hours, but as dawn broke over the valley, Savannah could see from the healing ward window that the siege towers had advanced another 100 yards during the night. They were coming closer, and the reinforcements had not returned. 4 days into the siege, the water supply was poisoned. Savannah discovered it when 3 wolves from the night watch collapsed with seizures. She reached them before Haddon, reading the nearest wolf's pulse with the instinct her mother had drilled into her since childhood. Night spine extract, she announced in the council chamber an hour later. Slow-acting paralytic from the southern marshlands, tasteless, odorless, nearly undetectable unless you know what to look for. The water source is an underground spring, Brennick said. The only access is within the keep itself. Someone inside Dunhallow was working for the enemy. Cale's gaze swept the room, and Savannah saw the full weight of the predator behind those controlled eyes. This was not the man who collected mountain flowers and stood outside her door at night. This was the wolf who had conquered 4 territories and earned the name that made grown alphas flinch. Lock down the keep. Every wolf accounts for their movements over the past 12 hours. Someone opened a door that should have been closed. He turned to Savannah. Can you counteract the poison? I can treat the 3 who are affected. But if the cistern is compromised, we need an alternative water source within 48 hours. There is a secondary spring in the old tunnels, but the access route passes close to the outer walls. I need to go myself. I am the only person in this keep who can identify night spine contamination on site. If Haddon tests the spring and misses it, we lose our last clean water and every wolf behind these walls. Absolutely not, Kyle said. The logic was irrefutable, and the look on his face told her he knew it. Through the bond, she felt the war between the king who understood strategy and the wolf who knew only that his mate must be protected at any cost. 2 hours, he said through clenched teeth. If you are not back in 2 hours, I am coming after you. Siege be damned. Morale be damned. Everything be damned. Savannah kissed him with fierce brevity, right there in front of Brennick and the assembled advisors. 2 hours, she promised. The tunnels beneath Dunhallow were old, expanded and reinforced by generations of Draven alphas since the keep's founding. Savannah moved through them with a lamp in one hand and her testing compounds in the other, flanked by 4 of Brennick's most trusted guards. The secondary spring was clean, completely uncontaminated. She was preparing the purification setup when one of the guards made a sound that was not quite a word. Something strangled, something wet. Savannah spun. A crossbow bolt protruded from the nearest guard's throat. Behind him, dark shapes poured from a side passage that should not have existed, a passage concealed behind loose stone that someone had recently cleared. The traitor had not just poisoned the water. They had opened a path for the enemy directly into the heart of the mountain. Silver-tipped bolts cut through the darkness. 3 guards fell before they could close the distance. The last was driven down. And through the tunnel, stepping over the bodies with the casual indifference of a man walking through his own home, came Hector Duskin. The yellowed teeth, the possessive eyes, the smile that made her skin crawl with revulsion so deep it felt embedded in her bones. There you are, my wayward bride. Savannah's back was against stone. Her guards were down. and the man her father had sold her to was standing 10 feet away with armed wolves at his back. But Savannah was not the same woman who had fled Ashenmere trembling 3 weeks ago. Cale's respect had changed her. The bond had changed her. And the rage that filled her chest was not the helpless fury of a caged animal. It was the focused, burning anger of a woman who had tasted freedom and would not surrender it. Her wolf erupted. The shift was violent and instantaneous, born from necessity and fueled by 3 weeks of suppressed power suddenly unleashed. Savannah had never fully shifted before, had never been trained, had never been permitted. But her wolf knew what to do. She was smaller than the enemy wolves, faster, and driven by something none of them possessed. She hit the nearest attacker before Hector's smile had time to fade, her jaws finding the soft junction of throat and shoulder with an accuracy that was pure instinct. The wolf went down screaming. She was already moving, pivoting, using the narrow tunnel to negate the numerical advantage. 2 more wolves lunged. She dodged the first and met the second head-on. Pain lanced through her side where claws raked her ribs. She twisted free, blood matting her silver-gray fur, and retreated toward the cavern. But there were too many. "Magnificent," Hector said. "Duskin women are expected to show spirit. It makes the breaking more satisfying." Her vision was blurring, the wound was deep. And then she felt it. Distant but approaching with a speed that defied reason. A wave of pure, unbridled fury so vast it shook the stone beneath her paws. Cale had felt her pain. And 2 hours had not passed. The tunnel behind Hector's wolves exploded inward. He came through the stone like the mountain itself was making way for him. Cale's wolf form was enormous, a creature of black fur and corded muscle that filled the tunnel from floor to ceiling. His eyes burned a molten silver white, illuminating the darkness like twin lanterns. The sound that tore from his throat was not a howl. It was a concussive force that hit the Duskin wolves like a physical blow, driving them backward in a stumbling retreat. He moved through them with a precision that was almost surgical, each strike calculated, each movement flowing into the next with the fluid economy of a predator who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of violence. 4 wolves down in as many seconds. The remaining 2 broke and ran. Hector was left standing alone. The older man drew a sword from beneath his cloak, a long blade that gleamed with the unmistakable sheen of silver alloy. Wolfsbane treated, a weapon designed to kill wolves, not fight them. "You think I came unprepared?" Hector spat, the bravado in his voice undermined by the tremor in his hands. Cale shifted. He stood before Hector unarmed, wearing only the torn remnants of his clothing, his body marked with the scars of a dozen campaigns. "Put down the sword, Duskin. You are in my mountain, in my tunnels, surrounded by my stone. There is no plan that accounts for what happens next. She is mine, legally bound, contracted, paid for." Cale took a step forward. The sword point was inches from his bare chest. "You would cite the law to me, a man who beat 3 women to death behind locked doors, a man who bought a 21-year-old girl from her father like livestock." Another step. The blade pressed against his skin. A thin line of blood appeared. "There is no law in this tunnel, Duskin. There is only you and I and the woman behind me whose body bears the bruises you put there." Something broke in Hector's eyes. The sword lunged. Cale moved. His hand closed around the blade, blood streaming between his fingers as the silver edge bit into his palm. With a single motion, he wrenched the sword from Hector's grip and hurled it into the darkness. Then his hand was around Hector Duskin's throat, and the older man's feet left the ground. 3 wives, 3 women who had no one to protect them. You survived because no one with the power to stop you cared enough to try. His grip tightened. Someone cares now. Behind him, a whimper. Savannah had shifted back to human form and was slumped against the cavern wall, her hand pressed to the wound in her side. Blood seeped between her fingers, dark and steady. Her face was white. "Kale, I need help." He dropped Hector like a sack of meal. The older man crumpled to the tunnel floor, gasping and retching, instantly forgotten. Kale was at her side in 2 strides. The rage vanished entirely, replaced by a terror so naked it stripped away every layer of control he had ever constructed. How bad? Deep, but clean. No organs. Savannah managed a weak smile. "I am the healer here, remember? I know my own anatomy. You are also bleeding significantly, which somewhat undermines your authority on the subject." He cradled her against his chest. Through the bond, she felt the oceanic relief of reaching her alive, the self-recriminating fury at himself for letting her go into the tunnels. The love, vast and absolute, pouring through like sunlight through shattered glass. She reached for his hand. The cut was deep, running from the base of his fingers to his wrist. The edges were blackened where the wolfsbane had entered his bloodstream. "You grabbed a wolfsbane blade with your bare hand. Dodging would have put the blade in line with you." The words were simple, factual, and they cut through Savannah's defenses more completely than any declaration of love could have. She pressed her lips to his damaged palm. The bond is extremely inconvenient for maintaining personal mystique. Brennick arrived with reinforcements minutes later, finding her king sitting on the tunnel floor with a bleeding woman in his arms, a semi-conscious Hector Duskin crumpled against the wall, and 6 incapacitated enemy wolves scattered through the corridor. "Dare I ask?" "Secure Duskin. Lower cells. 4 guards. None from the southern rotation." The traitor. Duskin used a concealed passage. Someone inside cleared the blockage and told him about the secondary spring. Cross-reference who had access to the tunnel maps with who had duty in the lower levels during the past week. Brennick looked at Savannah with something approaching genuine admiration. "Perhaps I should stop trying to confine you to the eastern wing." In the healing ward, Savannah stitched Kale's hand before allowing Haddon to tend her wound. "The bond needs to be completed," Kale said quietly. "An incomplete bond is a vulnerability the Archon will exploit. If they sever it by force, the pain alone could incapacitate us both." "After the siege," Savannah said, "when your people are safe." But through the bond, they both felt the unspoken fear. Reinforcements had not arrived, the traitor had not been found. And somewhere beyond the valley, the Archon was waiting. The traitor revealed himself on the 6th day. Not through investigation, not through Brennick's methodical cross-referencing of duty logs and tunnel access records. With a knife at Savannah's throat. She had been alone in the healing ward, preparing burn salves for the wounded, an arm locked around her chest. Cold steel pressed against the underside of her jaw. "Do not scream," said a voice she recognized. "If he feels your fear, he will come, and I will open your throat before he reaches this room." Korath, the gray-haired advisor who had argued for her return on economic grounds. "The Archon has offered terms, your surrender in exchange for withdrawal. I have served 3 alphas in this keep. I will not watch the 4th destroy everything we have built for one woman." Through the bond, she felt Kale's sudden alertness, a questioning pulse. She did the hardest thing she had ever done. She wrapped her fear in layers of calm, projected a false sense of safety, and gently closed the door between them. He trusted her, and she was using that trust to keep him away, while a traitor held a knife to her throat. Korath steered her toward the lower tunnels. "Hector is already free. I released him an hour ago. He is waiting beyond the walls with fresh wolves from the Archon's personal guard." "Korath, you are betraying a man who restructured his kingdom's food supply rather than surrender a single person to harm. A man who grabbed a poisoned blade because the alternative was letting it reach someone he loved. How many alphas would do that?" "Sentiment does not win wars." "No. But it is the reason wars are worth fighting." Savannah let herself stumble. A half step, a catch of her foot on the uneven stone. Korath adjusted his grip instinctively. the knife shifting a fraction of an inch from her throat. A fraction was enough. She dropped her weight, twisting out of his arm, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with every ounce of force she possessed. Korath doubled over, gasping, and the knife clattered to the floor. She kicked it into the darkness and ran. She did not run for help. She did not run for the walls or the healing ward or the eastern wing. She ran for the bond. She tore open the connection she had sealed shut, and the wave of emotion that crashed through was staggering. Cale's fury, his terror, his desperate need to reach her, all of it hit her at once with the force of a physical blow. She sent back everything: the traitor, the tunnels, Hector free, the Archon's guard waiting beyond the walls. The howl that shook Dunhallow Keep resonated through the stone itself, vibrating in the bones of every wolf within the fortress. Rage and protective fury and a promise of violence so absolute that Korath froze in his tracks and began to shake. Cale appeared at the end of the corridor. His eyes had gone the color of molten silver, and the intelligence in them had been joined by something primal and pitiless and old. "You held a blade to my mate's throat," he said softly, almost gently, the most terrifying sound Savannah had ever heard. "There is nothing to explain." Guards materialized from every doorway. Kyle turned to Savannah. His thumb traced the thin cut on her throat where Korath's knife had drawn blood. "I felt you close the bond. I almost tore this keep apart to reach you. Korath would have killed me before you arrived. I trusted myself to survive long enough to open it again." He pulled her against his chest with an intensity that bordered on pain. "You are the bravest person I have ever known, and you are going to be the death of me." "Not today," she said. "Today we survive." He turned to Brennick. "Duskin is free with Archon reinforcements. Korath has been feeding them intelligence since the siege began. Our defensive positions are compromised. Then we cannot hold the walls." "We are not going to hold the walls. We are going over them. Tonight." The plan was insane. Brennick said so. Every advisor who remained loyal said so. 112 wolves against 300, Brennick said. The mathematics are not encouraging. Their force fights for pay, obligation, and an authority figure none of them have met, Cale told the assembled wolves. There is no loyalty binding them together. We have something they do not. We have a reason to fight. His eyes found Savannah across the hall. She felt what he did not say aloud, that their reason was not abstract, not political. It was a woman who hid between his crates, a healer who fought wolves in tunnels, a mate whose courage had rewritten everything he thought he knew about strength. Brennick leads the eastern assault. I take the western flank. We drive them toward the river where their siege equipment cannot follow. Before the attack, Cale came to her. The bond should be completed before tonight. If something happens while it is partial, the Archon could compel a forced rebonding. Could hand you to Duskin and let him claim the connection by force. Either way, I lose you, she whispered. No. Either way, you survive. But in one scenario, you survive as your own person, with a completed bond no one can override. In the other, you survive as a weapon in someone else's hands. She looked at him for a long moment, at the scar on his jaw, at the bandaged hand where he had grabbed a poison blade for her, at the eyes that had seen her as a person from the very first moment when she was hiding between crates in the dark. I choose you, not because I am afraid, because you are the first person in my life who gave me a choice at all. The claiming was not the violent, dominating ritual Savannah had expected. There was no force, no assertion of ownership. Cale bared his throat to her first. The most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms tilted his head back and exposed the most vulnerable part of himself to a woman who had entered his life as a stowaway, with nothing but a thin dress and a bruised wrist. You first, he said. Claim me, so you know, beyond any doubt, that this was your decision. Her bite was gentle and precise, a mark of connection rather than conquest. The bond exploded open. She saw a 14-year-old boy standing over the bodies of 3 rival alphas, trembling with shock at what he had been forced to become. She saw a young king building a kingdom from rubble, bone-deep lonely. She felt what he had felt the night she climbed into his carriage. Not irritation at an intruder. Recognition. His wolf had known her before the lamp was lit, known her scent, her heartbeat, the precise frequency of her breathing in the dark. And she felt what it had cost him. 3 weeks of standing outside her door. 3 weeks of riding to the high country at 4 in the morning because the alternative was breaking down her wall and confessing that his entire existence had contracted to a single, unendurable point of need. He had borne it all because her freedom mattered more than his pain. Cale's bite completed the reciprocal mark, and Savannah gasped as his emotions poured through unfiltered. She was not a burden, had never been a burden. She was the axis around which his entire world had realigned. When the bond settled, they lay together, foreheads pressed together, breathing in unison. I can feel your heartbeat inside my own chest, as if I have too. You do. Mine has belonged to you since the carriage. The war horn sounded. Moonrise. Come back to me, she said. I did not survive 31 years of being the scourge of the eastern mountains to die on the night I finally have something worth living for. Savannah went to the healing ward and prepared for what was coming. Through the bond, she felt Cale fighting. The savage clarity of his wolf in combat, a crossbow bolt grazing his shoulder. Then the Archon's guard entered the battle, wolves who fought with coordinated discipline and an eerie absence of individual will. Not mercenaries. Soldiers fighting for something absolute. Cale's wolves faltered against the cold precision of an engineered fighting force. She felt his first real surge of fear. Not for himself. For his wolves. For Brennick. For the 112 souls who had followed him over the walls because he had told them they had a reason to fight. Savannah closed her eyes and reached deep into the bond. The power had been building since the claiming, a warmth that pooled in her chest and radiated outward through every nerve. Her hands blazed with golden light that turned the healing ward into a cathedral of warmth. She felt it pouring into Cale through the invisible thread that connected them. Strength flooded through his exhausted muscles, and around him, every iron-hulled wolf felt the same, a wave of energy rolling through the pack bond like sunrise, filling them with a ferocity that made the Archon's guard stumble backward. The tide turned. The Archon's guard broke first. The mercenaries followed. The allied wolves became a rout. Hector Duskin ran. Brennick's wolves cut off his retreat and drove him to the ground. By the time the moon reached its zenith, the siege was over. Cale walked past the cheering wolves, past Brennick's salute, past the rows of captured enemies kneeling in the torchlight. He walked straight to Savannah, took her face in his battered hands, and kissed her in front of his entire kingdom. The wolves howled. Not a war cry, something deeper and more primal, a sound of recognition. Their alpha had found his mate. The bond was complete. And the iron-hulled dominion had survived. Justice came with the morning. Hector Duskin stood in chains before the assembled wolves. Beside him knelt Korath. The great hall of Dunhallow had never been so full. Kyle addressed his kingdom. Behind this siege stood not merely Hector Duskin, but the Archon, a shadow authority manipulating marriages, trade agreements, and territories across the 5 provinces for years. This siege was not about one woman. It was about the systematic dismantling of every independent territory that refuses to submit to centralized control. He looked at Hector. Lord Duskin, you are charged with violation of territorial sovereignty, attempted murder of the Alpha Queen of the Ironhold Dominion, the poisoning of a civilian water supply, and conspiracy against the crown. Do you have words? Hector lifted his chin. She was legally mine. Everything I did was in pursuit of lawful property. The growl that went through the hall came from every wolf present, a collective sound of revulsion that vibrated in the stone floor. Kale turned to Savannah. He committed crimes against you first. The judgment is yours to render. She thought of his 3 dead wives, women whose names she did not know, women sold as she had been sold, buried without justice or mourning. I do not want your death, Hector. Death is too brief for what you have done. I ask that Hector Duskin be stripped of his title, his holdings, and his wolf. Let him live out his remaining years as the nothing he made of the women he destroyed. Let every wolf in the 5 provinces know his name and his crimes. Let him walk through the world without power, without status, without the ability to harm another living soul. A howl of approval shook the rafters. Korath received exile. Savannah argued for it over Kale's preference for execution, and won. The old advisor was escorted to the northern border and released into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge of what his betrayal had cost. You are more merciful than I would be, Kale told her afterward, as they stood on the battlements watching the morning sun burn shadows from the valley. A kingdom built on fear can be conquered. A kingdom built on justice endures. You sound like a queen. I sound like a healer who knows that burning stops the bleeding, but the infection remains. Justice cleans the wound. In the weeks that followed, the Archon's network was dismantled piece by piece. Allied provinces sent emissaries pledging renewed loyalty. Trade routes reopened. Grain shipments resumed from multiple sources, ensuring that no single province could ever again hold the Ironhold's survival as leverage. Savannah established a healing academy in the Eastern Wing, training wolves from across the territory in the medical arts her mother had passed down. She never stopped healing personally, treating any wolf who came through the door regardless of rank or station. The wolves loved her for it, not because she was their alpha's mate, because she had fought for them, bled for them, stood between them and poison with nothing but knowledge and courage. Kale watched her from the doorway of the healing ward one evening, leaning against the frame with an expression that had finally shed every trace of restraint. What? Savannah asked, looking up from the fever tonic she was teaching a young apprentice to prepare. I am trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the girl who hid between my crates and begged me not to send her back. And? The stories did not do you justice. She laughed and threw a dried herb at his head. He caught it without looking, because of course he did, and tucked it into his pocket, as if it were something worth keeping. That night, in their chambers, with the mountain wind pressing against the windows and the bond humming between them like a shared heartbeat, Savannah told him the thing she had been carrying for 2 weeks. I am pregnant. Kale went completely still. The healers confirmed it this morning. Early still. But the signs are clear. He dropped to his knees. The Alpha King of the Ironhold Dominion, the scourge of the Eastern Mountains. The wolf who had conquered 4 territories and faced down a 300-strong siege force without flinching. On his knees, with his forehead pressed to her belly and his shoulders shaking with silent tears. I spent 31 years believing I would rule alone, he whispered, that the cost of being what I am was never having this, a mate, a family, a reason to come home that was not made of stone. Savannah threaded her fingers through his hair. Through the bond, she felt the full weight of his joy, a vast sunlit landscape opening inside a man who had lived his entire life in fortified darkness. You are not alone anymore, she said softly. You have not been alone since I climbed into your carriage. He looked up at her, those gray eyes bright with tears and something far more powerful than the wolf or the crown or the mountains that bore his name. Thank you, he said, for being brave enough to run, for being brave enough to stay, for choosing me when you had every reason to choose nothing at all. Savannah knelt to meet him, their foreheads touching, their hands intertwined over the place where their child was just beginning. "I did not choose nothing," she said. "I chose everything. I chose you." Outside the windows of Dunhallow Keep, the wolves of the Ironhold lifted their voices to the stars. The story of a woman who fled into the carriage of the most feared wolf alive and found not a monster, but a man. A king who tore apart alliances and trade agreements because a girl with bruised wrists deserved better than what the world had offered her. A bond that was chosen, not claimed, completed not through force but through the quiet, radical act of two people deciding that the other's freedom mattered more than their own need. She had climbed into his carriage with nothing. She had found everything. And the wolves sang until dawn. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.